Alright, so welcome to the unofficial Steel Battalion Line of Contact Video Pilot Manual. Through this video, or perhaps series of videos, I hope to bring you a better perspective on the essentials of being a better VT pilot, as well as a better understanding of the Steel Battalion Line of Contact game in general. First things first, I'd like to give credit to Ryan Salzberger for his efforts in doing the video capture and editing on this little project. You may all know him by his Xbox Live username of Nemesis8722. My name is Will Scheuer, but I tend to go by my Xbox Live tag of King Lear UK. And I did all the scripting and voiceover for this series, so apologies now if this is terrible and you can't understand me for some reason. A little background on why we decided to do this. Despite Line of Contact, or LOC, as I'll sometimes refer to it in this video, having been out for nearly 4 years at the time of this recording, we still get new pilots joining the ranks all the time. Since all the official Capcom sites and info have long since disappeared, there are only a few resources left online for the game. Although my site, lineofcontact.net, and the steelbattalion.org forums still provide a great deal of information, learning how to actually play the game of Line of Contact is still very difficult due to the steep learning curve. As such, the purpose of this video tutorial is to give new and perhaps prospective players some insight into how the game works and some basic guidelines and advice on getting through the very first steps of piloting a vertical tank in the game. As best as possible, I've tried to break up the content here into logical sections, but there will no doubt be some topics I either revisit or only briefly cover due to the organization of the material. In the most general sense, we will first cover some movement and VT control basics, followed by a review of the cockpit heads-up display and other informational items. Following this, I'll get into some of the gameplay concepts, in-game communications, VT configuration and loadout suggestions for newer players, and finally some game session management and connection issues. Piloting controls. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about the basic piloting controls within Line of Contact. At their most basic, the left stick controls the direction of travel for the VT. Acceleration and braking are handled by the right foot and center foot pedals. Speed is controlled by the left block gear lever, and much like a manual transmission car, shifting through the gears is determined by torque. More on this later in the tutorial. Aiming of the weapons is accomplished using the right control stick, which is non-centering by design. The view camera direction is controlled by the analog thumb hat on the left control stick. Ideally, new pilots will have had at least a few hours experimenting with the offline campaign in the original Steel Battalion game. The basic movement and combat concepts apply to both games. Damage avoidance is accomplished in Steel Battalion by the use of a slide step pedal, the third and leftmost on the foot controller. Pressing this pedal in combination with the direction of travel and gear selected will cause the VT to dodge in the desired direction. This is known as a slide step. Combinations of the slide step pedal, gear selection, and the left stick will produce the desired direction. Use of the slide step pedal is limited by the amount of battery power available. Once the battery reserve has been depleted, it will temporarily overheat, which is shown on the HUD as heat and the battery status indicator. Second and third generation vertical tanks include an override feature, which allows them to perform beyond their normal specifications, but at the expense of additional fuel consumption. Turning on override using the button on the center control block will allow a VT to more quickly recover from activities that tax battery systems, such as slide steps or energy-powered weapons. This video clip shows the difference in performance when using override. It is recommended to only use override during combat engagements when additional maneuverability is required, or to more quickly replenish energy-fed weapon systems. Unnecessary use of the override can result in fuel reserves being depleted, leaving your VT restricted to second gear travel and unable to slide step. Basically, an easy target for any enemy VT. Unlike the original Steel Battalion, the gear and torque profiles for VTs are much less forgiving. From a dead stop, you will almost always need to start in first gear to get a VT moving properly, shifting up through the gears as the torque meter reaches maximum. Attempting to shift up through gears before sufficient torque is built up will result in a loss of speed and torque, not ideal for a combat situation. The gear selection and torque meter are also critical components to maintaining velocity when encountering adverse terrain like steep hills and water crossings. Typically, you will need to downshift in order to maintain sufficient torque and maximum possible speed. Line of contact now includes a mode of travel called wheel, which is enabled by putting your VT into 5th gear. This can only be achieved as sufficient torque has been built up beforehand. Wheel mode is very effective for quickly moving around the battlefield, but it does make a VT much more prone to tipping over. If you tip your VT over at any speed, in order to stand back up, you must shift down to first gear and then press the acceleration pedal. This will initiate a rise procedure, but only after your VT has come to a complete stop. Tipping over should be avoided whenever possible, and with line of contact, the heads-up display will give you more warning and a chance to correct the imbalanced state in a more forgiving way than the original Steel Battalion game. As the VT begins to overtax its balancer, a bow warning will display on the HUD, as well as warning indicators. Depending on the mode of travel and the state of the balancer, you may be able to correct the imbalance by simply lessening the degree of the turn or shifting to a lower gear. In other instances, a small dose of the slide step pedal will reset the balancer. As mentioned before, if the battery has been overtaxed and has not recovered, slide steps cannot be performed and the VT will end up tipping over.